Look, let me be straight with you. I'm going to tell you what happened. Because honestly, I'm still furious about the whole thing. My name is Alara. I'm 28. And this entire disaster with my ex, Julian, it's just proof that some men are utterly incapable of handling a woman who knows her own worth. We were together for 3 years. And let me tell you, those were 3 years where I was treated exactly the way I deserved to be treated. Finally, Julian wasn't just a boyfriend. He was a provider of experiences. He was one of those rare men who actually understood the assignment. You know the type. The kind who surprises you with a custom-made sapphire necklace just because he saw you glance at it in a magazine. Who books a weekend trip to a private vineyard in Napa because you mentioned offhand that you were stressed at work. He even enrolled in a 6-week French culinary course just so he could recreate the coq au vin we had on our first anniversary. Who does that? Seriously. Most men I've dated think romance is remembering to take the trash out without being asked. Julian, he was different. He kept our apartment filled with fresh lilies, my favorite. He'd show up after my long days at the marketing firm with a box of artisanal macarons from that ridiculously expensive bakery downtown. He basically spent 3 years making sure I felt like the queen I am. And why shouldn't I? Why should any woman settle for some lazy slob whose idea of a big night is Netflix and greasy takeout? Julian understood. He knew that to keep a woman like me, a woman with options, you have to put in the work. You have to earn your place in her life, every single day. He worked out 5 times a week, a detail he knew I appreciated. I deserve a man who takes care of himself, who looks good on my arm. I'd catch him on the phone with his friends, his voice low, saying things like, "You have no idea how lucky I am." And let's be honest, he was. I could have had anyone. I chose him. That should have meant something. But the thing is, Julian made our relationship too easy. If I wanted a girls' night out, he wouldn't just approve, he'd insist. Go have fun, Alara. You deserve a break. Don't worry about a thing. If I needed space, if I wanted a weekend to myself to just read and exist, he'd smile, kiss my forehead, and tell me to enjoy the peace. He trusted me, completely. Which, if you ask me, was just profoundly naive. You can't just assume the person you're with will remain loyal forever without any effort to keep them on their toes. A relationship isn't a savings account you just deposit into and expect it to grow. It's a fire. You have to tend to it. Sometimes, you have to fan the flames with a little bit of chaos. But Julian thought that just being a good, dependable financial analyst was enough. His whole life was a spreadsheet, and I was just the most valuable asset in his portfolio. He had this routine: a good morning, beautiful text at 7:15, on the dot, a call around lunch to ask about my day. He remembered the name of my difficult client, the one I'd been complaining about for weeks. He remembered I preferred oat milk with only half a shot of espresso. It was sweet. For a year. By year 3, it started feeling predictable. Like I was living with a very thoughtful, handsome robot. And then there was Reese, Julian's best friend. Reese was always around our apartment, usually crashing on our couch after a night out with Julian and the guys. And honestly, Reese got me. In a way Julian never even tried to. Where Julian was stable, reliable, a bedrock of predictability, Reese had an edge, an energy that was actually exciting. He would challenge me. If I made some grand statement about a marketing campaign, Julian would just nod and say, "That's brilliant, Alara." Reese would lean forward, a glint in his eye, and say, "Brilliant or just loud? There's a difference. Convince me." He teased me. He pushed my buttons. He made me feel alive, not just worshipped. And yes, there was chemistry there. A crackling, undeniable energy that Julian was apparently too busy balancing his ledgers to notice. Reese would look at me, really look at me. Not like I was a prize he'd won, but like I was a puzzle he was dying to solve. The whole thing started subtly. A lingering look when Julian was in the kitchen grabbing more drinks. A text from Reese late at night, supposedly sent to the wrong person, that just said, "Can't stop thinking about that conversation." I knew what he was doing, and I loved it. Finally, a man who played the game. Julian, meanwhile, was completely consumed by his new obsession. A car. Not just any car. A vintage, dark green Jaguar E-Type. His mechanic friend, Marco, had found one in decent condition, but it needed a full restoration. The project was going to cost a fortune. For months, all Julian talked about was that car. He'd work extra hours, taking on freelance accounting projects on weekends. He skipped guys' nights out to save money. He was sacrificing everything for a machine. He'd show me pictures of restored models online. His eyes lit up like a little boy's. Imagine it, Alara. Driving up the coast in this. It's not just a car. It's a piece of art. A legacy. Honestly, I found it a little pathetic. Here he was, pouring all this energy and passion into a hunk of metal, while the actual living, breathing woman in his bed was dying of boredom. If he had put half that obsessive energy into keeping our relationship exciting, things might have been different. But Julian was always more focused on his 5-year plans and his investment portfolios than on the unpredictable thrill of the now. He had everything mapped out. His career, his finances, his me. And that kind of security, it didn't feel safe. It felt like a cage. Reese and I had been hooking up for 2 months before Julian found out. And they were the most exhilarating 2 months I'd had in years. It started with coffee. He'd texted me, "Julian's stuck in a meeting until 8. I'm bored. Save me." So I did. We met at a small cafe, tucked away in a part of Westwood City I'd never been to. The conversation was electric. We argued about art, about politics, about music. He didn't just agree with me. He made me defend my opinions. He made me laugh. When he walked me to my car, he leaned in, his hand brushing a strand of hair from my face. "You know," he whispered, his voice a low rumble. "Julian has no idea what he has, does he?" And he kissed me. It wasn't gentle or sweet like Julian's kisses. It was hungry, demanding. It was a rush. With Julian, I always knew what I was getting. He'd bring me coffee just the way I liked it. He remembered every little preference. It was nice, but it was also boring as hell. Reese was a storm. Sometimes he'd shower me with attention, texting me all day, telling me all the things he wanted to do to me. Other times, he'd go silent for a day, acting like I barely existed. And that uncertainty, that chase, it kept me on my toes in a way Julian never did. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I felt guilty. Why should I? Julian had gotten comfortable. He'd stopped trying to impress me. He just assumed I'd always be there, his perfect, beautiful girlfriend on a pedestal. That's not how you keep a woman. Not a woman like me. You can't just coast on being a good guy and expect that to be enough. Reese understood that relationships need friction, a little bit of danger to stay alive. When I was with Reese, I felt like myself again. Wild, unpredictable. Not just Julian's perfect porcelain doll. The sneaking around was honestly the best part. Julian would head off to his office, thinking everything was perfect, and I'd have Reese over within the hour. We'd meet in discreet hotel bars, in parks on the other side of town, places Julian would never even think to look. It felt like I was finally living again, instead of just existing in the comfortable, sterile bubble Julian had created for us. Reese didn't want to change me. He didn't want to put me on a pedestal. He liked the messy parts of me, the parts that were a little wild. Julian always treated me like I was this precious, fragile thing he needed to protect. But Reese, he saw me as his equal, a co-conspirator. The whole thing came crashing down on a Tuesday. Of all the mundane, stupid days for a life to implode, a Tuesday. I had texted Julian earlier that morning. "Me? Hey, what time are you home tonight? Thinking of making that risotto." Julian. "Ugh, project deadline from hell. Won't be out until 9 at the earliest. Don't wait up for me, beautiful." Perfect. That gave Reese and me at least 5 hours. He came over around 4. We opened a bottle of wine. Things escalated, as they usually did. We were on the couch, tangled up in each other, when I heard it. The sound of a key in the front door. My blood ran cold. I pushed Reese off me, scrambling for my clothes. But it was too late. The door swung open, and there stood Julian. He was holding a bouquet of lilies and a small takeout bag from my favorite sushi place. "Finished the project early," he started to say, a wide smile on his face. "Decided to surprise." His voice trailed off, his eyes locked on me, fumbling with my shirt. Then they shifted to Reese, who was hastily pulling up his jeans. The smile on Julian's face didn't just disappear. It evaporated. It was like watching a photograph burn from the inside out. The lilies slipped from his hand, scattering across the hardwood floor. I braced myself for the explosion, for the yelling, The accusations, the drama, the fight for our relationship that any normal man would initiate. I had my excuses ready, my justifications. I was prepared for a battle. Instead, there was silence. A deep, hollow, terrifying silence. He just stood there for a full minute, his face a blank mask. He looked at me. He looked at Reese. And then he looked back at me. The look in his eyes wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was nothing. It was like he was looking at a stranger, a piece of furniture he no longer recognized. Then, he spoke. His voice was calm, chillingly calm. "We're done, Ilara." He didn't shout it. He stated it. Like a fact. Like reporting the weather. "I'll get my things later." And then, he turned around and walked out. He closed the door softly behind him. No drama. No begging. No tears. Nothing. And that made me angrier than if he had screamed. If he had thrown something, if he had called me every name in the book, at least I would have known that our 3 years meant something to him. That I meant something to him. His calm, surgical dismissal made me feel like I was nothing. An inconvenience he was simply removing. And that was, honestly, insulting. Reese left pretty quickly after that. He mumbled something about not knowing Julian would be home, about how this was a mess. He couldn't even look me in the eye. Coward. Suddenly, I was sitting there alone, surrounded by the scent of crushed lilies, and a terrifying thought began to creep in. Maybe I'd just lost the best thing that had ever happened to me. Not because I missed Julian, exactly, but because his reaction meant he was really, truly done. And nobody had ever just walked away from me like that before. For 2 months after Julian left, my life became a singular mission: to get his attention, to force a reaction, any reaction. I started with the obvious: texts, calls. "Julian, we need to talk about this. You can't just throw away 3 years like this. I deserve a chance to explain." Within a week, my number was blocked. So, I got creative. I emailed him from a new address. No response. I convinced my friend Chloe to text him, pretending she was worried about me. He replied with a polite but firm, "I appreciate your concern, but this is between Alara and me. Please respect my privacy." And, I made a fake social media account, and what I saw was infuriating. He wasn't posting sad, cryptic quotes about heartbreak. He wasn't drunk in photos, looking miserable. He was just living. Pictures of him hiking with friends. A post about a promotion at work. He was existing, normally, as if the last 3 years of his life of my life had just been a footnote he'd erased. It felt like a slap in the face. The more he ignored me, the angrier I got. I deserved an explanation. I deserved the chance to tell my side of the story. In my mind, if he really loved me, he would have fought. He would have demanded to know why. He wouldn't have just given up. His silence wasn't strength. It was childish. It was cruel. And then, he bought the car. The one he'd been saving for, the dark green Jaguar E-Type. I saw the pictures on his profile. There he was, leaning against the hood, a genuine, relaxed smile on his face. The car was stunning. I'll give him that. Gleaming and perfect. And I felt physically sick. Here he was, celebrating his freedom from me. That car wasn't just a car. It was a symbol. It was a monument to his new life. A life where he was doing just fine. No. He was doing better without me. He was investing his time, his money, his passion into this thing, instead of into us. What really got to me was the caption he wrote. 3 years of hard work finally paid off. Time to protect the investment. Custom security array installed and ready to go. Protect the investment. It felt so personal, like he was protecting it from me. Like he thought I was some kind of unstable, vindictive threat that he needed to guard against. The nerve of him, that hurt more than I want to admit. It meant he really saw me as someone dangerous, rather than someone he had loved who had made a mistake. I am not some crazy ex who goes around keying cars. I am a grown woman. A grown woman who just wanted to have one, single, adult conversation with the man I had spent 3 years of my life with. But he was making that impossible. He was leaving me no other way to communicate. I didn't plan to destroy it. It just happened. I was driving home from a client dinner, taking a different route to avoid traffic. A route that took me past his new apartment complex. I wasn't even thinking of stopping. But then I saw it. sitting there under a lone lamppost in the parking lot, looking all perfect and shiny and smug, and something inside me just snapped. Here was this thing that Julian cared about more than he'd ever cared about fixing us. This car that represented his ability to just move on, like our 3 years together were nothing more than a bad investment he'd written off. So, I decided then and there, if he wanted to ignore me, if he wanted to pretend I didn't exist, maybe damaging something he actually cared about would finally get his attention. I drove home, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I went to the utility closet in my garage and grabbed a small tool bag. A hammer, a set of old keys, a Phillips head screwdriver. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was just feeling hurt, angry, tired of being dismissed. When I got back to his parking lot, I parked a block away and walked. I wore the gloves I kept in my car for cold mornings. I started with his so-called security array. I saw the obvious little camera mounted on his dashboard, its tiny red light blinking. I'm not stupid. I took care of that first. A quick, sharp rap with the hammer. The light went out. Then, I went to work on the windows. The sound of the glass shattering. It was actually satisfying. A loud, sharp shriek in the quiet night. Each crack that spread across the tempered glass felt like I was finally making him pay attention, even if it wasn't the way I wanted. I keyed the paint job next. Long, deep scratches down the sleek, dark green sides. I didn't write words. I just drew lines. Angry, jagged lines that said everything I couldn't say to his face. The whole time, I kept thinking about his reaction. When he found it in the morning, maybe he'd finally realized that ignoring me wasn't an option, that we needed to talk. I managed to jimmy one of the broken windows enough to unlock the door. And then I ruined the inside. I ripped the beautiful tan leather seats with the screwdriver. I smashed the classic wooden dashboard. I basically made sure the car was totaled. It felt like justice. In a weird, twisted way. Julian had destroyed our relationship by refusing to fight for it. So now something he loved was destroyed too. Maybe now he'd understand how it felt to lose something important without getting a choice in the matter. Before I left, I took a pen and a napkin from my purse. I wrote a note, and I placed it under the one remaining windshield wiper. Please, I just want to talk to you, because that's all I wanted. I wasn't trying to get back together. Not really. I just wanted him to acknowledge me. To acknowledge what we'd had, to give me the closure I deserved. The note was my way of explaining. This wasn't random violence. It was communication. A desperate, last-ditch effort to get through to him. The whole thing took maybe 20 minutes. And, when I was done, I felt better than I had in weeks. Finally, I had done something he couldn't ignore. 3 days later, a courier delivered a manila envelope to my apartment. It wasn't a letter from Julian. It was a thick stack of legal documents. Charges for felony, vandalism, and destruction of property. He hadn't called me. He had called the police. When I read through the paperwork, my stomach dropped. I found out that Julian's custom security array wasn't just the one obvious camera on the dash. He had 2 others. Tiny, hidden ones. One concealed in the rearview mirror mount, and another in the side vent. They had recorded everything. Every swing of the hammer. Every scratch of the key. My face, illuminated by the parking lot light, perfectly clear. I felt so stupid, and so betrayed. It was like he had set me up. How was I supposed to know he'd be that paranoid? The timing couldn't have been worse. I had a final round job interview scheduled for the following week. A huge promotion. A director position at a rival firm. And I just knew, that having felony charges on my record would destroy any chance I had. He wasn't just getting back at me. He was trying to ruin my life. I tried to fix it. Of course I did. I did what any reasonable person would do. I tried to contact Julian to work this out before it got out of hand. I bought a burner phone. I had Chloe call him again. I even tried messaging him through his work's professional network. Every message was the same. Julian, I know you're upset, but involving the police is taking this too far. Please, just talk to me. I'll pay for everything. We can sort this out like adults. He never responded. He was being completely, utterly unreasonable, treating me like some common criminal, instead of the woman who had shared his bed for 3 years. How could someone be so cold? So unforgiving? Everyone makes mistakes. The fact that he wasn't willing to show me a shred of mercy, it just proved he'd never really loved me. Not the way I thought. I started telling people our story. Mutual friends. I hoped they would talk some sense into him. But instead of supporting me, most of them got this. Look, This look of pity and judgment, they acted like I was the one being unreasonable. Alara, you totaled his car, Chloe said, her voice gentle but firm. What did you expect? They couldn't understand. They couldn't see that I was only acting out because he had pushed me to it. He had refused to give me the closure I needed. He had left me with no other choice. The stress was destroying me. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus at work. And the job interview, the one that was supposed to change my life, was a complete disaster. The charges hadn't been resolved yet, but in a city like Westwood, word travels fast. The interviewer was polite, but distant. I could tell he'd already heard. He'd already made up his mind about me before I even sat down. I didn't get the job, and soon other opportunities started drying up too. I was now that woman, the one who destroyed her ex's car. My professional reputation, which I had spent years building, was ruined. Over one moment of poor judgment. And Julian still wouldn't even talk to me. That was just the beginning. A few months later, I saw it. On one of my late-night scrolling sessions through his life, Julian was dating someone new. A woman named Amelia. She worked in his building, apparently. They looked happy. In the photos, she was nothing special. Just average. Plain brown hair, a simple smile. The kind of woman who wears sensible shoes. But Julian was smiling in their pictures in a way I hadn't seen in years. Not the polite, posed smile from our fancy dinners. A real, deep, genuine smile that reached his eyes. Seeing him move on so completely while I was still buried under legal fees and social disgrace, it was like a knife twisting in my chest. The worst part was watching how normal their relationship looked. There were no grand gestures, no expensive gifts, just pictures of them cooking together in his new, smaller apartment, hiking on a Sunday, laughing at some street fair. They looked like partners, like equals, not like one person worshiping the other. It made me realize that maybe Julian had learned something from our relationship, about what he actually wanted, but instead of giving me a chance to grow, to change with him, he just replaced me with someone who was apparently better suited to his boring, stable lifestyle. The criminal charges ended up costing me thousands in fines and legal fees, plus 200 hours of community service that was humiliating and exhausting. But the social consequences were worse. Friends who had tolerated my drama before started distancing themselves. People began to see through the victim narrative I'd been telling. They started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, Julian had good reasons for cutting me off so completely. Even Reese wanted nothing to do with me. Once the legal troubles started, he vanished. Blocked my number. Acted like he'd never even met me. My dating life became non-existent. Men would hear the story and run. I was too much drama. Too unstable. Julian and Amelia seemed to bring out the best in each other. He looked relaxed, genuinely content. They had the kind of easy, comfortable relationship I'd always thought was the definition of settling. But watching from the outside, through the cold glow of my phone screen, I started to understand. Maybe what I'd seen as Julian being complacent was actually him being secure, confident in what we had. The problem wasn't him, it was me. I needed chaos to feel alive, and he needed peace to thrive. We were fundamentally incompatible. But instead of recognizing that and ending things like an adult, I had cheated. And then I had destroyed his property when he wouldn't let me back into his life to cause more chaos. Even now, as everything has fallen apart around me, a part of me can't fully admit it. I can't bring myself to say the words, "I was wrong." His refusal to forgive me still feels cruel. His ability to move on and find happiness with someone else still feels like a personal attack. Proof that our love never meant as much to him as it did to me. In my mind, late at night when I'm alone, I am still the victim. A victim of his coldness. A victim of his new girlfriend's perfect, boring act that I'm sure won't last. I spend way too much time checking his social media, watching him build this wonderful, quiet life, while I'm here, dealing with the consequences of my choices. But I tell myself I was just unlucky. Unlucky to have been involved with someone as heartless as Julian. Someone who could throw away 3 beautiful, passionate years over one mistake, and then rub his new, mundane happiness in my face for the whole world to see.